Welcome to the Crawcast. I'm your host, George Krawczak, and today we are looking at why Shedeur Sanders fell in the NFL draft. A lot of people had Shedeur going in the first round, and he ended up being a fifth round pick. Well, today I'm going to look at why is that. I'm going to break this video kind of down into two parts mainly. Part number one is his on the field play. Was it good? Was it not good? So on the field performance. And the second part is going to be off the field stuff. Was the reason why he wasn't drafted because of off the field stuff? Was there any controversies, any scandals, stuff like that? So now that that's out of the way, let's get started. And if you like this type of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button like it owes you money. So what is the on-field reason for Shedeur Sanders falling in the draft? Well, the draft is just not set up for someone like Shedeur Sanders. And what I mean by that is you draft people for traits that you cannot teach. Shedeur Sanders is 6'1", which is below average to below average quarterback height. He has an average arm and he has average speed. The draft is where you look for people with certain innate traits that you cannot teach. For example, Anthony Richardson. He got drafted fourth overall in the NFL draft despite doing basically nothing in college. He was drafted so high because he had an amazing arm, he has great speed, and it's the hope that Anthony Richardson can learn the mental aspect of football. Where Shedeur Sanders does excel is he has great accuracy, especially in short and medium ranges. He has a lot of great decision making, and although he does occasionally take too many sacks, overall he excels at the mental part of football. He is just great at the stuff you can't teach and average at the stuff you cannot teach. This is the exact opposite of what people in the draft are looking for. I think another good example is Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. They're both seen as projects, incredibly raw, need to work on the mental aspect, but had great physical traits, especially Josh Allen, who had terrible accuracy early in his career, and then last year he developed and was learning, and he won the MVP of the league. So this also reminds me a little bit of like Amon-Ra St. Brown, the star wide receiver for the Lions. So he fell until the fourth round, even though he was one of the best receivers in the draft. And it's because he's 6 foot, which is average height for a receiver. He has below average speed, and he really can't jump that high. But he has great route running, great hands, and has a great release. So I want to stress this as much as possible. The top rounds of the drafts, NFL execs look for someone with an amazing traits that you cannot teach with the ability to learn the things you cannot, or learn the things you can teach. Whereas Shedeur Sanders is kind of the opposite of what they're looking for in the sense that he has average traits of the stuff you can't teach, and he's great with the stuff that you can learn. So in NFL terms, I'd probably compare him to like a Brock Purdy type of quarterback, where you can win games with him if you have the right people around him. But if you want Shedeur Sanders to single-handedly win you the game, I just don't think he can do it. And based on his talent alone, I would grade him as probably a late first round pick at earliest, and maybe a late second round pick at absolute worst. Now I feel like we need to address the non on the field reasons he fell in the draft. And the big elephant in the room is his personality and how he handled the pre draft process. First, Shedeur Sanders' father, Deion Sanders, who is also his agent, by the way, said on the $1 million Worth of Game podcast that both Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter will pick which team gets to draft them. He said Shedeur Sanders will be a top 4 pick. And there are certain cities that he is not willing to play for, and he might even pull an Eli Manning, which he's referring to when Eli Manning was selected number 1 overall by the Chargers, and he said he wouldn't play there, and he ended up getting traded to the Giants. And Deion Sanders also tweeted that if he was a quarterback, he wouldn't want to go to the Browns. So now we have to move into the ego concerns. We have a bunch of reports before the draft that Shedeur Sanders had a terrible pre-draft interview with certain teams. It seemed like he did not take their interview seriously and he was unprepared. It seems like he did not care because basically he was going to one of the top teams in the NFL. So it kind of reminds me of a little bit like Abdul Carter, what he did. He only interviewed with 4 teams before the draft. It was the Titans, the Browns, the Giants, and the Patriots. Luckily for Abdul Carter, he did go in the top 4 picks, and it was by the Giants, and that's because he has a top 4 talent. But let's say Abdul Carter starts falling, and now imagine that he is not picked up in the top 4. Well, a lot of other teams could be seen as like a big screw you that he's only interviewing with the top 4 teams because that's what he thinks he's worth, and he's not going to interview with any other teams. And we know the Jaguars tried to interview him, he said no. The Raiders wanted to interview him, he said no. And so I think that's what kind of happened with Shedeur, is that he thought he was going to be a top draft pick, and he only cared about like 1 or 2 teams, and when those teams ended up not picking him, I think all the other teams were rubbed the wrong way when he's like, okay, I'm only going to play for these couple of teams. And I think that shows a lot of immaturity. He also did not throw at the combine, and he also blamed the offensive line quite a bit during his time at Colorado. And also, it is true, his offensive line was not good. But you don't go out into the media and start blaming your offensive line. He also flexes his money and flexes his watches, and he also talks trash to opponents after the game. And they also built a giant draft room for him during the draft. And during the combine, he said, if you're not trying to change the culture or the franchise, don't draft me. It seemed like he believed he was a higher and better and more important than everyone else. And you can act like that when you're the top overall pick, but you can't act like that when you're a second, third, fourth, fifth round pick. The factors just don't line up. And then also, I think it's a factor of the amount of teams. And I'm not counting the Titans because it feels like they have always were going to draft Cam Ward with the first overall pick. But the only teams that could potentially have a rookie quarterback starting this year are the Browns, the Steelers, and the Saints. Those are the only 3 teams that could have a rookie quarterback starting. So I say this because Shedeur Sanders, because of his attitude, because of his personality, it creates a media circus and a lot of media attention. And that's fine if you're the starter, but if you're the backup, that's a problem. If you're the backup quarterback, you should sit down, shut up, and support the starter. And unless you're a dedicated fan, you should not even know who the backup's name is unless the starter gets injured. If you're a backup quarterback and you're making headlines, it is almost always a bad thing. This kind of reminds me a little bit of Tim Tebow, and what killed Tim Tebow's career is that he had such a cult following that when the Jets signed him, there was so much pressure put on the coaches to start him. And whenever Mark Sanchez had a bad game, there was a lot of pressure to bench Sanchez and put Tebow in the game. And eventually, teams just decided they didn't want to deal with the media attention or the pressure. So any team with an established quarterback just did not want Sanders because they don't want to deal with the pressure of the media saying Sanders should come in after every single bad game. So any team, so that effectively left 3 teams for Shedeur Sanders: Steelers, Browns, and Saints. And when you're a top pick, you can do whatever you want. But when you're a lower draft pick, the teams need to like your attitude. And when you have a bad attitude, the teams like you less and less. So I have no idea what teams Shedeur Sanders thought he was going to, or what Shedeur Sanders wanted to go to. Out of these 3 teams, I assume it's got to be at least one of them. But when you have a huge media attention and potentially a bad personality, only a couple of teams will be interested in you, and that's what makes you fall in the draft. Well, you might say also someone like Mike Green got drafted by the Ravens in the second round because he had assault allegations. So why does Shedeur Sanders off the field issues make him fall? Well, keep in mind, Mike Green has not been convicted with anything, and he has not been charged with anything. He's just been accused. So best case scenario is that he did not do it, and he was just unfortunately falsely accused of something he did not do. An absolute worst case scenario, let's just say he did it. Well, the Ravens are hoping that that was a one-time thing that will never happen again. And the difference between like the assault allegations and this is it should be pretty easy to sit down and say don't assault anyone, which is a thing that should hopefully be able to follow and not do it. Whereas with Shedeur Sanders, it's sitting down with him and say, okay, basically we want you to completely change your personality. That feels almost impossible to do. So now that he fell in the draft and got drafted by the Browns in the 5th round, where do we go from here? So the Browns right now have 5 quarterbacks on their roster. You have Deshaun Watson, who is injured, and so I'm not really going to count him because he is going to miss the entire year because he is injured. So you have Joe Flacco, who took the Browns to the playoffs 2 years ago. You have Kenny Pickett, who is a former first-round pick, and they traded a fifth-rounder for. You have Dylan Gabriel, who you drafted in the third round, and you have Shedeur Sanders, who you drafted in the fifth round. This is interesting on who makes it and who doesn't, because if you ask me if there was a game tomorrow, who is most likely to win that game for the Browns, I would say Joe Flacco. I think he has proven himself that he is probably the best quarterback out of the three. But it is interesting on how much they invested in each quarterback. They invested a third round pick in Dylan Gabriel. They invested a fifth round pick in Kenny Pickett, and they invested a fifth round pick in Shedeur Sanders. And they've invested nothing in Joe Flacco. And also, Joe Flacco is 40 years old and clearly has no chance of being their franchise guy, even if he wins the starting position. So I think this is a perfect situation for Shedeur Sanders because it does feel like he has a shot at being the starting quarterback. And if he is the starting quarterback, he will earn it. Because I feel like a lot of the issues with Shedeur Sanders' ego and stuff like that are people saying, okay, your dad's the coach, you're designing the whole offense around you, and it feels like when your dad's the coach, you never really have a lot of competition. And so now you can for certain 100% say if Shedeur Sanders is the starting quarterback out of these four, he will have earned it. And right now, people just don't think he's earned the right to be as cocky as he has been. And so I'm thinking this is a good thing that he'll know that in the draft it was a full scale rejection of his personality, his attitude, and stuff like that. So maybe he'll take a look in the mirror and say, okay, I fell in the draft. People clearly do not like this, so I need to change. I need to go to work. I need to focus on football, and I need to be better. So we'll see how Shedeur Sanders' career ends out. He could be cut from the team. He could be their starting franchise quarterback. There's so many different possibilities for him that makes it so interesting. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this type of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button like it owes you money, and I'll see you on the next one.